Hi everyone, my name is Lana and this is my first ever YouTube video. I wanted to talk about the case of Erin Patterson because I haven't seen any, if many, videos online where they would talk about her life from the very beginning to where we're at now. So that's something I wanted to do for anyone else who couldn't find something like that. I've been really obsessed with this story since it first started. I was listening to podcasts to and from work every day, and then once we got the verdict from the jury, I still found myself trying to get information on her life. So that's what I'm doing here. I've videoed this so many times where I've tried to memorize it and I just can't, so I'm just going to read off my notes. I hope that's okay. However, I did write all of this by myself. So even though I'm reading off this and it might look scripted, I wrote all of this myself. I did all the research, so at least give me that. In this video, I wanted to break down everything that we have about Erin so far, from her life growing up and the events leading up to the infamous lunch and everything that has unfolded since. So, Erin Trudy Scudder was born here in Melbourne, Australia on the 30th of September 1974. Her mother, Heather Scudder, was a literature lecturer at Monash Uni, specialising in children's literature. Her father, Aiton Scudder, was often referred to as Hugh. It was his middle name. He was a government worker. I'm honestly actually not too sure what he did for a living, but it said that he held multiple directorship roles across various Australian companies in New South Wales and South Australia. Erin did have a younger sister named Kinwin. I couldn't find any information on her date of birth. However, to respect her privacy, I didn't really look that hard into it. Erin grew up in an eastern suburb of Melbourne named Glen Waverley in a middle-class household. It was said that her household was quite intellectually driven, and she was later described by some co-workers and friends of being really smart. On the outside, the Scudder household appeared stable and academically successful, but Erin would later describe her childhood as bleak, overly controlled, strict, and emotionally distant. In private text messages from Erin that later became public, she told a friend, "My mum was ultra weird her whole life. We had a horrible upbringing. Mum was essentially a cold robot, and it was like being brought up in a Russian orphanage where they don't touch babies." When speaking of her father, she referred to him as a doormat. She said that he was kind-hearted but passive. She said that he wanted to be warm and loving to her and her sister, but her mother wouldn't let him because in her mind it would just end up spoiling the kids. She would just shout at him if he did the wrong thing, so he would end up becoming meek and compliant. She also explained that her and her sister Kinwin would hide in their bedrooms most of the time because this way they couldn't do anything wrong and that way they couldn't get in trouble from their mum. In Erin's view, this imbalance in their parenting styles contributed to a childhood that was emotionally stunted and lacked affection. After retiring from their careers, Erin's parents moved from Melbourne, Victoria to Eden, New South Wales, where they would settle in a large oceanfront home where they would both eventually pass away of cancer. Following high school, Erin began her studies at the University of Melbourne in 1992, enrolling in a science course. However, she ended up transitioning to accounting at still Melbourne University. There's no actual information on whether or not she graduated from Melbourne Uni, but she ended up training to become an air traffic controller, and she would eventually work at Air Services Australia at our very own Tullamarine Airport. Her fellow co-workers called her Scudder the Nutter, saying that she was a loner, secretive, unkempt, and that she had an off-putting presence. She was said to be quite manipulative and apparently even was able to manipulate some male colleagues. One allegedly expressed interest in leaving his wife for her. And after 1 year and 9 months of working at Air Services Australia, Erin got the sack for recording full shifts despite leaving early. And when the management called her up on this, all she had to say was, "You've got me there." Following this, she went back to her accounting roots but would change it up again, where she joined the Monash City Council as an RSPCA Animal Management Officer, and here she would meet a group of co-workers who were described as an eclectic group of friends, and part of this group she met Simon Patterson. Now, Simon Patterson was working at the Monash City Council as a civil engineer, and he and Erin would become quite close and eventually would become Facebook official. Now, Simon was a devout Christian, and Erin described herself as a fundamentalist atheist, which is basically someone who not only lacks belief in God, but also holds really strong and intolerant views against religion and religious people. Yeah. Despite their differences, Simon would ask Erin to marry him in February of 2007, and just 4 months later, in June, they would marry at the Korumburra Anglican Church. The pair's conversation about religion and Erin's church visits clearly deeply influenced her, because she would end up joining Simon in turning to Christianity. After marrying, Erin and Simon set off on a trip across Australia, driving in a 4-wheel drive with a tent before settling down in Western Australia, and then in 2009 the couple welcomed their firstborn, a little boy. Erin described the birth as very traumatic, saying it went for a very long time and they tried to get him out with forceps. He wouldn't come out and he started to go into distress, and that's when they lost his heartbeat, so they did an emergency cesarean and got him out quickly. After that, their son required additional care in the NICU, and Erin said that this had quite an emotional toll on her, and she ended up having mistrust against medical professionals. So she ended up discharging herself and her child out of the hospital against medical advice. In the first few months after their son was born, Erin and Simon decided on another trip across northern Australia. This trip ended up being a disaster because their 3-month-old son just couldn't go to sleep, and Erin was feeling really overwhelmed, so she ended up flying back home to Perth by herself, leaving the baby and Simon to drive home to Perth, which took about a week's time. This trip resulted in Erin and Simon's very first separation, with Erin renting a little cottage and Simon staying at the local caravan park. While they reconciled about 6 months later, this would not be their last split. They would be on again, off again a few more times before moving back home to Victoria in 2013, when their son was about 4 years old. Now, Erin said that this decision was driven by a desire to raise her son closer to family, including his cousins and Simon's parents, Don and Gail Patterson. Now, do not forget the names Don and Gail Patterson. So after moving back to Victoria, Simon and Erin would stay at Don and Gail's house for about 6 weeks, sharing a bedroom there, before they would purchase a house in Korumburra. And Korumburra is about 120 kilometres southeast of the Melbourne CBD, which is our major city. And this house is where they would welcome their second baby, a little girl. Now, when their daughter was about 1 year old, the couple would go their separate ways again, and this time it would be for good. They would still remain on good terms, and they would actually still go on family holidays around Australia, and there were a few overseas ones where they would go to places like South Africa, New Zealand, and even Botswana. Being on good terms would end around 2022, when Simon put himself down as separated on his tax return. Well, Erin found out about this, and she was pretty pissed off, because by Simon doing this, he had affected their family tax bracket, which meant that she could no longer apply for a $15,000 a year income. And this means that she would need to file for child support in order to get some money coming in. Simon did offer to undo the separation on his tax return, but Erin declined, and she said that she was just going to go ahead and file for the child support. So before Simon putting himself as separated, their relationship was fine, they were quite chatty, but now their communication had turned to pretty much just functional talk, and a lot of the time Erin wouldn't even respond to Simon, she'd just be leaving him unread. Now, I need to add in here that Erin had received a $2 million inheritance from her paternal grandmother's passing in 2009, and that was paid in installments until about 2015. In addition to this, she also received another $900,000 inheritance from her mother's passing in 2019, and with this she used it in investments such as purchasing a block of land in Leongatha, and this is where she would build her forever home on Gibson Street. And despite their split, Erin would still put Simon's name on the title of the house, and this was prior to 2022, but she said this was basically a gesture of goodwill, and it indicated that she was still open to reconciliation. She would help out family, and she even lent one of Simon's brothers $300,000 to build a house, and she wouldn't ask for it to be paid back with interest. All that she asked was that it was paid back with inflation. So the fact that Simon had done this on his tax return felt like a huge betrayal to Erin, considering the fact that she had been so generous with these inheritances. Anyways, Erin would text some friends complaining about the Patterson family. She said that she messaged the group chat complaining about how Simon was asking her to withdraw the child support claim and how unfair that was on her and the kids. Simon's dad, Don, said that he didn't want to get involved in their financial things, and by Don doing this, Erin was convinced that he had taken sides. She told her friends, quote, "I'm sick of this shit. I want nothing to do with them. I thought his parents would want him to do the right thing, but it seems they're concerned about not wanting to feel uncomfortable and not wanting to get involved in their son's personal matters are overriding that, so fuck 'em." End quote. So clearly there was some strain in the relationship between the Pattersons and Erin, and this is why it came as a surprise when Erin approached some family at church one day asking them to come to her house for lunch. The reason Erin wanted to do this was because she had recently been diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she wanted to ask advice on how to break this news to their 2 young kids. On the night before the lunch, Simon texted Erin saying, "Sorry, I feel too uncomfortable about coming to lunch with you, Mum, Dad, Heather and Ian tomorrow, but I'm happy to talk about your health and implications of that at another time. If you'd like to discuss on the phone, just let me know." And Erin responded to this saying, "That's really disappointing. I've spent many hours this week preparing lunch for tomorrow, which has been exhausting in light of the issues I'm facing, and spent a small fortune on beef fillet to make beef Wellingtons because I wanted it to be a special meal, as I may not be able to host a lunch like this again for some time. It's important to me that you're all there tomorrow and that I can have the conversations that I need to have. I hope you'll change your mind. Your parents and Heather and Ian are coming at 12:30. I hope to see you there." So here we are on Saturday, the 29th of July, 2023. Don and Gail Patterson, along with Gail's sister Heather and her husband Ian Wilkinson, arrived at Erin's home as planned, but Simon did not show up. Her guests sat down to a carefully prepared meal of beef Wellington with a side of green beans and mashed potatoes. Now bear in mind that Erin actually didn't make one big beef Wellington. She made 6 individual ones, so there would be one for each individual guest. Heather praised the meal as delicious and beautiful, but within hours, all 4 of the lunch guests started experiencing severe gastrointestinal symptoms, including nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. The day following the lunch, Simon spoke to his parents, who said that they were going to call an ambulance to take both of them to the hospital because they were so unwell. He then tried calling Ian and Heather to see how they were feeling, but he couldn't get a hold of them either, so he just ended up rocking up to their house. Ian answered the door looking grey, and Heather was also on the couch and she was really struggling. So Simon called 000 to get Ian and Heather to the hospital, but he felt the first responder on the other end of the line was basically trying to delay it because she said that it would take about an hour for the ambulance to get to their house. So he's like, "I'm going to take matters into my own hands and I'm going to drive them to the hospital myself." As they were getting ready to leave the house, Heather made mention to Simon how she noticed that the lunch was served on different coloured plates. All of the lunch guests got a larger grey coloured plate, but Erin got a smaller orangey tan coloured plate. Now Heather must have had an inkling that something was a bit iffy here, because she would ask Simon again on the way to the hospital whether or not Erin was short on crockery, and if that is why she would have been served a different coloured plate. Now, Don and Gail were admitted to Dandenong Hospital but were later transferred to the Austin Hospital, and that's where they continued to deteriorate due to acute liver failure and multiple organ failure. Don was apparently in substantially worse shape than Gail. He was hunched over on his side, he had a discoloured face, and his voice was strained in such a way that showed how much pain he was in. And despite receiving intensive care and Don undergoing a liver transplant, both Don and Gail sadly passed away, Don on the 5th of August and Gail the day before him on the 4th. Heather and Ian would originally be admitted to Leongatha Hospital experiencing the same symptoms as Don and Gail. Here they would meet Dr. Chris Webster, who worked to save their lives, and he would actually end up becoming a big part of this story. Erin arrived at Leongatha Hospital while Ian and Heather were waiting to be transferred to the Austin. She was complaining of gastro-like symptoms like that of the other guests, and when she told Dr. Webster her name, well, he instantly recognized her as the chef of the meal. Dr. Chris would tell her that the hospital was suspecting mushroom poisoning as the reason that all the guests were sick, and he basically asked her where did she get the mushroom from so that they could, try and avoid any further poisoning to anyone else, and she replied, Woolworths. Dr. Webster later went on to say that this one-word answer instantly convinced him of her guilt. He said that if she had have admitted to foraging for mushrooms, then he could have believed that this was an honest mistake, but something about the way she answered his question made him sure that she was guilty. Anywho, doing his job correctly, Dr. Webster said to Erin that they need to start her on intravenous treatment right away to fight mushroom poisoning, which I think made her shit her pants, because when he turned around to take a phone call, she was like, I'm out of here, and she, for the second time, discharged herself against medical advice. If you want to, you can actually look up footage of this online. So Dr. Webster is really shocked here, right, because he's told Erin that she's potentially suffering from fatal mushroom poisoning, and when he turns his back, she leaves. So he tried calling her mobile 3 times, and on the 3rd time when she didn't answer, he leaves her a voicemail message saying, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to call the police, and that's exactly what he did. Erin later said in her trial that the reason for her going home was because she didn't expect to have to stay long enough to receive IV treatment. She said that she had to feed her animals and pack her daughter's ballet bag. She would return to hospital around 2 hours later, and I think around the same time she returned, that's when the police rocked up to her house. So she's at the hospital and the police called Dr. Webster saying she's not here, but he's like, don't worry, she's come back. But this smarty pants had a plan. He became the messenger between Erin and the police, and he was like, hey, can you please try and find some remnants of the meal so that we can test them? And Erin said, yes, the police can do this. So they did just that. So Dr. Webster said that he became aware that her kids had eaten some of the meal. However, Erin said they hadn't actually eaten any of the mushrooms because this had been scraped off the Wellington. She said that she didn't want to bring the kids to hospital because it would scare them, to which Dr. Webster replied quite bluntly, well, they can be scared and alive or dead. Going back to Ian and Heather, ICU specialists reported that Heather had developed relentlessly progressive acute liver failure with multiple organ systems shutting down despite aggressive medical intervention. And so her condition was deemed too advanced for a liver transplant. And sadly, she died in hospital on the same day as her sister Gail on the 4th of August. Ian's liver failure was so severe that the medical professionals thought he was going to die as he had multiple organ systems failing. However, he was listed for and received a liver transplant which thankfully saved his life. He spent 21 days in the ICU followed by a stay in the rehabilitation ward, and he was finally discharged on September the 23rd as the sole survivor of the lunch guests. So now we're at the point where 3 people have died, 1 person has almost died, and not only the police but the entire nation is extremely suspicious of Erin. The media is calling it the lunch of death, and everyone is analysing her infamous interview where the news reporters rocked up to her home and were interviewing her in her driveway.
It's a tragedy what's happened.
Can you tell us about the meal that you cooked?
I'm so devastated by what's happened, by the loss of Don. Don is still in hospital, the loss of Ian and Heather and Gail, who were some of the best people that I've ever met. Gail was like...
Take your time.
Gail was the mum that I didn't have because my mum passed away 4 years ago. And Gail's never been anything but good and kind to me. And Ian and Heather were some of the best people I've ever met. They never did anything wrong to me, and I'm so devastated about what's happened.
Can you tell us
and the loss to the community and to the families and to my own children who've lost their grandmother.
Can you tell us a bit more about the lunch?
What I can tell you is that I just can't fathom what has happened. I just can't fathom what has happened. That Ian and Heather have lost their lives, and Gail has lost her life, and Donna's still in hospital, and I pray that he pulls through because my children love him.
And you must be pretty shaken up by this as well.
I'm devastated. I love them. And I can't believe that this has happened, and I'm so sorry that they have lost their lives.
How are you kids?
I just can't believe it. Just can't believe it.
Can you tell us where the mushrooms came from? they picked from the property
I
area, the
just
mushrooms?
ask you to leave me alone now,
Sure.
please.
Police say you're a suspect. Do you have anything to say about
Yes,
that?
I say I didn't do anything. I love them. And I'm devastated that they're gone. And I hope with every fibre of my being that Don pulls through. That's
Where
what I
did the
have to
mushrooms
say.
come from? Were they picked by you, or where did they come from, Erin? Can you tell us? What meal did you cook them? Did you eat the same meal, Erin?
So everyone's like, why is this woman not in jail yet? Well, on November the 2nd, 2023, Erin Patterson is arrested at her home in Leongatha. She's charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. Now, these 4 additional counts of attempted murder related back to earlier incidents where Simon would end up sick after eating a meal at Erin's. So now the investigation begins. Remember how Smarty Pants Dr. Chris Webster got the police to grab the leftovers? Well, they were passed on to a forensic toxicologist by the name of Dimitri Gerastomoulis, and he was given the task to analyse samples of the beef Wellington, the food dehydrator, and the guests themselves. He said that there were 2 different types of toxins that he was looking for. He was looking for the alpha type and the beta type. And he was given 2 bags, and in one bag there were samples of the mushroom paste and the pastry, and in the second bag he also had the mushroom paste and the pastry samples, but this one also included meat samples. He explains that the way that he carries out this testing is by putting the dry samples into vials, and then he adds a clear solvent liquid, I'm not too sure what it's called, and then after a few hours he will take out a bit of that liquid, and that is what is used to test for the poison. So from these 2 bags there were 9 samples taken, and of those 9 samples, a couple of them did test positive for the death cap toxins. There was also a woman by the name of Dr. Trang Truong who tested the same dry samples as Dimitri Gerastomoulis, but her test showed up negative for the toxins. Dimitri explained in court that this is because she had tested under a microscope which looks for visual detection of the compounds, and this would have been made especially hard given that it was a mushroom paste and basically not a better sample, whereas the test that he carries out uses specific instruments that are very sensitive to finding the molecules in the chemical compounds of the toxins. He also tested the vegetable debris that was left over from the dehydrator, and from that they got 4 positive samples for the toxins. Then there's the lunch guests. He mentioned that the toxins are most potent in urine, and they were able to get these samples from the lunch guests, and of them, 2 of the 5 tested positive for death cap toxins, and that was both Don and Ian. However, just because the others came up negative, that doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't poisoned, as different people metabolize differently. Now, in the trial, the court also heard from a woman named Sally Ann Atkinson. She was in a senior public health official role within the Victorian Department of Health, and her role was to basically find out where these mushrooms came from and whether or not they were a broader health threat. Erin told Sally that the majority of the ingredients, including the mushrooms, were from Leongatha Woolies. However, she did get some dried mushrooms, and they were purchased from a nearby Asian grocer. Bear in mind, this is different than what she told Dr. Chris Webster. She told him that it was just from Woolworths. Anyway, Erin was unable to recall exactly where she got them from, but it would have been in the Oakley, Clayton or Mount Waverley area. Sally followed up by texting Erin asking what the packaging of the mushrooms looked like, what was the name of the road she was parked on or near when she purchased them, and even a landmark would have been extremely helpful in the search for this Asian grocer. Erin didn't answer, so the next day, Sally tries calling Erin, and again, no answer. So she sent another text at around 9:30 a.m. explaining that she really needed to get this investigation underway, and that she was going to send Erin a list of questions because this information was starting to become really urgent. Once again, Sally receives no response, but she was able to get in touch with Erin at some stage, and this is where Erin's story about the mushrooms changes again slightly, because instead of getting them from potentially Mount Waverley, it could have been Glen Waverley. Sally did ask Erin, did you forage for the mushrooms? And Erin said no. The court also heard from Christine McKenzie. She was a former pharmacist who then worked at the Victorian Poisoning Information Hotline, and she was also a mushroom enthusiast. Now, she spoke about going for a walk with her grandson in a town called Lock on the 18th of April, where she noticed some mushrooms that she was almost certain were death caps. She posted images of the mushrooms she took on a website called iNaturalist. iNaturalist is basically a website for citizen scientists and nature enthusiasts who can post about insects, birds, and mushrooms. But the thing about iNaturalist is that whenever your phone location is turned on, it will post the latitude and longitude of wherever the image was taken. And in this case, Christine's phone location was on. And just 10 days later, Erin's phone location records show her potentially being in the lock area. There was actually another mention of death cap mushrooms on the iNaturalist website, and that was in the Outram area in May. And once again, more activity on Erin's phone saying that she was in that area. After one of these trips, there was proof to show that Erin made a stop at Better Home Living, and here she bought a sunbeam dehydrator which she would use to dry the mushrooms for the lunch. There was actually CCTV footage of Erin found a couple of days after the lunch at the local tip where she chucked out the sunbeam dehydrator. I think that the American equivalent to tip is a dump or a landfill centre. We call it a tip. You just go there and you just chuck it out. Erin later admitted that the reason she chucked out the dehydrator is because in hospital Simon said to her, "Is that how you poisoned my parents using the dehydrator?" And she said that this really frightened her, and that's why she lied about where the mushrooms had come from, because she was scared. Now, remember how earlier I said that Erin had recently been diagnosed with cancer? Well, that was a big fat lie. She said that she had actually wanted to undergo gastric bypass surgery, but she was too ashamed to tell anyone out of fear of judgment, so she made up the lie of having cancer. She said that she thought it would be easier to get help with caring for her children while she was recovering, and the prosecution suggested that this lie was calculated. They said that she wouldn't have had to expect being questioned about this because she believed that the guests wouldn't survive, and Erin denied this, saying that she wasn't trying to cover anything up, and she maintained that the lie came from a place of personal shame. I'm smiling because this part's ridiculous. She said that she had booked in a consultation at the Enrich Clinic for the gastric bypass. But when questioned by the prosecution, they pointed out that the clinic didn't actually perform gastric bypass procedures because they're a cosmetic and dermatology clinic. They are not a bariatric surgery provider. Now, Erin admitted that during the pandemic, she developed a passion for foraging, especially mushrooms. She told the court that she preferred the taste of foraged mushrooms over store-bought ones, and she eventually got good enough to start identifying different types, but somehow she couldn't identify the most poisonous of them all. No. She explained that she would forage for mushrooms around the Korumburra and Leongatha area, and she would put both of her foraged and store-bought mushrooms in the same pantry containers. She said that she had also used the food dehydrator that she bought from Better Home Living to dry mushrooms that she had collected, as well as the ones that she had purchased from Woolies. Erin later claimed that she did suspect that there was a mix-up between the types of mushrooms and that death caps may have accidentally ended up in the beef Wellington, but at the time of cooking, she believed that the container she used only held supermarket mushrooms. When asked why she didn't get as sick as the other guests, well, she said that while cleaning up, she noticed there was about 3/4 of orange cake left over. She began eating it, one slice, then another slice, then another slice, until she had finished the whole thing. Feeling so full, she went to the bathroom and she made herself sick, and that is likely what spared her from severe poisoning that the other guests suffered. According to her, she had effectively vomited up the beef Wellington before the toxins could take full effect. And finally, she admitted to factory resetting her phone multiple times. She said that she initially did this because she was afraid that the police would find photos of dehydrated mushrooms on the device. And then later, after the police had already confiscated her phone, she remotely wiped it again. Her explanation for this one was, "I wondered if the police had been silly enough to leave it connected to the internet, so I hit factory reset to see what would happen, and it worked." Idiot. So for the jury to find Erin Patterson guilty, the prosecution had to prove 4 key elements beyond a reasonable doubt. They needed to prove that 1, Erin had administered a substance, 2, that the substance was poisonous and capable of death, 3, that Erin intended to cause serious harm or death, and 4, that the poisoning was the direct cause of death. Well, on the 7th of July 2025, almost 1 year and 11 months to the day since the lunch, Erin Patterson was found guilty on 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Sentencing is expected to take place in the coming weeks, where the judge will weigh everything that's come to light during the trial and determine how long she'll spend behind bars. As of today, Erin is held at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre in Ravenhall, Victoria. So that's it. That is all of my research put into an 8-page script. I hope that you liked it. This is the first time I've ever done a video. I don't know if I would do it again, but if you'd like me to, please let me know. Tell me if you've got any tips on how I can do better. I know that my lighting is crap. Nothing I can really do about that right now. I thought I did have some lights actually, but I chucked them out, I think. And while I do like learning about true crime and stuff, I can't spend so much time doing the research because I find that it negatively affects me. But what I really am into, I'm really into consciousness and I'm really into aliens. So I want to do some alien stuff. And also like conspiracies, whether or not I believe it, I think that they're really interesting. So I might do some like MK Ultra kind of stuff. But yeah, let me know what you think and please like it. Just help me out. Just like my video. Even if it's crap, just like it. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate it, especially when there's much better quality videos out there. You stayed with me. Please give me a thumbs up or like it and just, you know what? Subscribe. Why not? What have you got to lose? You know? I don't really know how to end this. Rove used to say hi to your mum for me, so you could do that. Do you want to meet Greg? Greg! Come here. Come here. Come on. So this is Greg. He asks very politely that you like this video and that you subscribe. Right? Tell him. And we'll see you in the next one, maybe about aliens. Bye.